Harmony Gulch clung to the side of a mountain like a stubborn burr on a woolly sheep. It wasn't much to look at, a scattering of rough-hewn cabins, a dusty main street barely wide enough for a wagon to turn around, and a saloon that doubled as the town hall, and, on Sundays, a makeshift church. The wind howled through the gaps in the buildings, a constant reminder of the unforgiving landscape. Life in Harmony Gulch was a daily struggle. The gold rush had long since petered out, leaving behind only the diehards and those too stubborn or too poor to move on. The soil was thin and rocky, making farming a constant battle against the elements. The men worked hard, prospecting for whatever little gold remained, trapping animals for their fur, or trying to coax a meager crop from the unyielding earth. The women toiled equally hard, tending to the homes, raising children, and making do with whatever supplies they could get their hands on. Supplies were always a problem. The nearest town of any real size was a 3-day journey by wagon, a treacherous trip even in the best of weather. In the winter, it was nearly impossible. That meant relying on what they had stored up during the summer and fall, and hoping it would be enough to last until spring. More often than not, it wasn't. Winters were particularly brutal. The snow piled high, burying the cabins and making it nearly impossible to travel. The temperatures plummeted, freezing fingers and toes and testing the limits of human endurance. The wind howled incessantly, driving the snow into every crack and crevice, and making it feel like the cold was seeping into your very bones. Harmony Gulch was a place where people learned to be tough, to be resilient, and to rely on each other. It was a place where hope was a precious commodity, and where even in good times, life was a constant struggle against the odds. But even in Harmony Gulch, there was a spark of optimism, a belief that things could get better, that spring would eventually come, and that even the harshest winter would eventually end. It was this stubborn hope that kept the people of Harmony Gulch going, even when everything seemed bleak. This winter, however, was different. It wasn't just another hard winter. It was shaping up to be the worst anyone could remember. The first blizzard hit in early October, catching everyone off guard. It dumped several feet of snow in a matter of hours, and the wind howled like a banshee, tearing at anything that wasn't nailed down. Old Man Hemlock, who claimed to be 90 if he was a day, swore he'd never seen anything like it. He said it reminded him of the winter of '49, the one that drove half the prospectors out of the mountains for good. But even that, he conceded, might not have been as bad as this. The blizzards kept coming, one after another, each one fiercer than the last. The snow piled higher and higher, burying the cabins up to their roofs. The wind never stopped, and the temperatures plummeted to record lows. Even the animals seemed to sense the danger, and many of them had already migrated south, leaving the townspeople with even fewer resources. The supplies were dwindling fast. The root cellar, usually packed with potatoes and turnips, was almost empty. The smokehouse, which had been filled with smoked meat in the fall, was now bare. Even the flour and beans were running low, and people were starting to worry about how they would make it through the winter. The isolation was becoming unbearable. The mountain passes were blocked by snow, cutting Harmony Gulch off from the outside world. There was no way to get supplies, no way to send for help. They were on their own, facing the full fury of the winter. Fear began to creep into the hearts of the townspeople. They huddled around their fires, telling stories to keep their spirits up, but the fear was always there, lurking in the shadows. They knew that if the winter didn't let up soon, they were in serious trouble. Children started to cough, and the adults worried about sickness spreading. Firewood was getting scarce, and the men had to risk their lives venturing out into the blizzards to find more. Even the strongest among them were starting to feel the strain. This winter wasn't just hard, it was threatening to break them. It was a test of their will, their courage, and their ability to survive. Harmony Gulch was facing its greatest challenge yet. Now, in those days, things were different. Life was hard, and finding a wife wasn't always easy, especially in a place like Harmony Gulch. There weren't many women to begin with, and those who were there often had their pick of the available men. That's where the idea of mail-order brides came in. It was a common practice back then. Men in the West, often lonely and isolated, would place advertisements in newspapers back east or even in Europe describing themselves and what they were looking for in a wife. Women, seeking a better life or simply a chance for adventure, would respond, and if things seemed promising, they would travel west to meet their potential husbands. The men of Harmony Gulch, seeing their numbers dwindling and their prospect for finding wives even more so, decided to try their luck with the mail-order bride system. It wasn't a decision they came to lightly. They were proud men, used to taking care of themselves. But they also knew that the town needed women, not just for companionship, but to help build a future. Children needed mothers, homes needed keepers, and the town needed a sense of community that only women could truly bring. It was a collective decision made at a town meeting in the saloon. Each of the unmarried men contributed what they could to a fund, and a letter was drafted describing Harmony Gulch and the kind of woman they were hoping to attract. They emphasized the need for someone strong, resourceful, and willing to work hard. They didn't sugarcoat the hardships of life in Harmony Gulch, but they also promised a good home and a loving husband. The letter was sent off with a prayer and a hope that someone, somewhere, would answer their call. They knew it was a long shot, but they also knew that they had to try. The future of Harmony Gulch depended on it. They waited, their hopes flickering like candles in the wind, for a response that might change their lives forever. They were seeking not just a wife, but a partner, a helpmate, and someone to share their lives with in the face of the unforgiving West. Across the vast ocean, in the green and misty land of Ireland, lived a young woman named Saoirse. Her name, in the old tongue, meant freedom, and that was exactly what she craved. Life in her small village had become stifling, a predictable cycle of hard work and little reward. The potato famine, though years in the past, still cast a long shadow, and opportunities were scarce. Saoirse was a woman of spirit and intelligence, with a quick wit and a kind heart. But she felt trapped, her dreams confined by the limitations of her circumstances. She yearned for something more, a chance to use her skills and make a difference in the world. When she saw the advertisement from Harmony Gulch in a newspaper, it sparked a flicker of hope within her. The description of the town was honest, even bleak, but it also spoke of a community in need, a place where she could be valued and appreciated. The promise of a good home and a loving husband was appealing, but it was the opportunity to build a new life, to contribute to something meaningful that truly resonated with her. Leaving Ireland was a difficult decision. It meant leaving behind her family, her friends, and everything she had ever known. But Saoirse was determined to forge her own path. She sold what little she had, packed her meager belongings, and booked passage on a ship bound for America. She knew the journey would be long and arduous, and that life in Harmony Gulch would be far from easy. But she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She was strong, resourceful, and determined to make a success of her new life. She dreamed of a place where her skills would be valued, her opinions respected, and her heart cherished. She hoped to find a community where she could belong, where she could make a difference, and where she could finally find the freedom she had always longed for. America, to Saoirse, was more than just a place. It was a promise of a fresh start, a new beginning, and a chance to finally be herself. Saoirse's journey to Harmony Gulch was a testament to her resilience. The ship voyage across the Atlantic was rough, with towering waves and seasickness that plagued many of the passengers. Saoirse, however, found strength in her determination and helped care for those who were weaker, sharing her meager supplies and offering words of encouragement. Once she arrived in America, the journey was far from over. The train ride westward was long and uncomfortable, the carriages crowded and dusty. She traveled for days, watching the landscape change from bustling cities to vast plains and finally to the rugged mountains of the West. The final leg of her journey was the most challenging. She had to hire a stagecoach to take her to Harmony Gulch, but the weather was turning fierce. The blizzards that were already crippling the town were making travel treacherous. The stagecoach was often delayed, snowbound in small settlements, or forced to turn back due to impassable roads. Food was scarce, and the cold was relentless. Saoirse huddled under blankets, trying to stay warm, but the wind seemed to find its way through every crack and crevice. She met other travelers along the way, all struggling to reach their destinations in the face of the worsening weather. They shared stories and offered each other support, finding strength in their shared hardship. At one point, the stagecoach became completely stuck in a snowdrift. The driver and passengers had to work together for hours, shoveling snow and pushing the heavy vehicle until it was finally free. Saoirse, despite her small size, worked tirelessly, her determination fueled by the hope of reaching Harmony Gulch. She faced dishonest people who tried to take advantage of her, and moments when she doubted whether she would ever reach her destination. But through it all, she never gave up. She held on to her dream of a new life, and that dream gave her the strength to endure. Each obstacle she overcame made her even more determined to succeed. The harsh weather, the long delays, the discomfort, and the uncertainty, all of it tested her limits. But it also revealed the depths of her courage and her unwavering spirit. Saoirse was proving to herself, and to anyone who doubted her, that she was more than capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. The stagecoach finally lurched into Harmony Gulch, a ghost-like apparition emerging from the swirling snow. Saoirse stepped down, her legs shaky and her face numb from the cold. The blizzard was at its peak, the wind howling and the snow falling so thick she could barely see. The town looked even more desolate than she had imagined. The cabins were buried deep in snow, and the few people she could see were huddled inside, their faces grim and weary. No one came out to greet her. The stagecoach driver, a gruff man named Jebediah, pointed towards the saloon. "That's where they'll be," he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Good luck to you, miss." And with that, he turned the stagecoach around and disappeared back into the blizzard. Saoirse stood alone in the swirling snow, feeling a wave of doubt wash over her. Was this the new life she had dreamed of? A desolate town, buried in snow, with no one to welcome her? She took a deep breath and reminded herself of why she had come. She had faced worse challenges than this, and she wouldn't let a little snow scare her away. She trudged through the deep snow towards the saloon, her small suitcase bumping against her leg. When she finally reached the door, she hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The scene inside was not encouraging. A few men were gathered around a pot-bellied stove, their faces etched with worry. They looked up as she entered, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. No one spoke. The silence was broken by a gruff voice. "Who are you, and what do you want?" It was the town's blacksmith, a burly man named Silas, who spoke. Saoirse straightened her shoulders and looked him in the eye. "I'm Saoirse," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the cold. "I've come from Ireland. I believe you sent for me." A murmur went through the room. The men exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. They had sent for a mail-order bride, yes, but they hadn't expected her to actually arrive, especially not during the worst blizzard in history. And they certainly hadn't expected someone so small. They were wary, unsure of what to make of this young Irish woman who had suddenly appeared in their midst. They had hoped for a strong, capable woman who could help them weather the storm, but Saoirse looked fragile and delicate. Could she possibly survive the harsh realities of life in Harmony Gulch, especially during this brutal winter? They would soon find out. Despite the initial skepticism, Saoirse was determined to prove her worth. She knew she might not look like much, but she possessed a wealth of knowledge and skills that could be invaluable to the town. She had learned from her grandmother in Ireland, a woman known throughout their village for her wisdom and her ability to heal. The first thing Saoirse noticed was the lack of proper food preservation. She saw precious meat going to waste because it wasn't being smoked or salted correctly. She gently suggested better methods, explaining how to keep the meat from spoiling and how to make it last longer. Some were resistant at first, but when they saw the difference in the taste and longevity of the meat preserved using Saoirse's methods, they began to listen. She also saw that many of the children were suffering from the cold. Their clothes were thin and ill-fitting, offering little protection against the harsh weather. Saoirse, remembering her own childhood in Ireland, knew how to make warm and durable clothing from simple materials. She showed the women how to spin yarn from wool, how to knit thick socks and mittens, and how to sew warm coats from old blankets. But Saoirse's greatest gift was her knowledge of natural remedies. She knew which herbs could ease coughs, which plants could heal wounds, and which teas could soothe aching muscles. When a young boy fell ill with a fever, Saoirse stepped in and brewed a tea from willow bark, which she knew contained a natural pain reliever. The boy's fever broke, and he was soon on the mend. Word of Saoirse's skills spread quickly throughout the town. People began to seek her out, asking for her advice and her help. She never turned anyone away. She shared her knowledge freely, teaching the townspeople how to care for themselves and their families. Slowly but surely, she began to earn their trust and their respect. They were beginning to realize that this small Irish woman, who had arrived during the worst blizzard in history, might just be the answer to their prayers. She had brought with her not gold or riches, but something far more valuable: the knowledge and skills to help them survive. One particularly harsh evening, a frantic mother rushed into the saloon, her face pale with terror. Her young son, Thomas, had wandered off while playing near the woods and hadn't returned. A search party had already been formed, but the blizzard was worsening, and the chances of finding him alive were dwindling with each passing minute. The men were preparing to head out, but they were hampered by the blinding snow and the bitter cold. Saoirse, listening intently, noticed the mother's description of Thomas's clothing. He was wearing a bright red scarf, knitted by his grandmother. "Red will be difficult to see in the snow," Saoirse said, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "But if he's near the creek, the steam rising from the warmer water might create a small pocket of clearer air. And if he's scared, he'll likely seek shelter, perhaps under a fallen tree or near a large rock." She then asked for some anise seeds, explaining that the strong scent could help guide the search dogs. She also instructed them to carry whistles, to use in case they got separated or found Thomas but needed help. The men, initially hesitant to take direction from her, were swayed by her calm demeanor and her logical suggestions. They followed her instructions, dividing into smaller groups and heading out into the blizzard. Saoirse, despite her small size, insisted on joining the search. She knew that time was of the essence. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and followed one of the search parties, her eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of the lost boy. After what seemed like an eternity, they heard a faint whistle in the distance. They followed the sound, their hearts pounding with hope. Finally, they found Thomas huddled beneath a fallen tree, shivering and scared but alive. The red scarf, though partially covered in snow, had been just visible enough to catch their attention. Thomas was quickly brought back to the saloon, where Saoirse wrapped him in warm blankets and gave him a soothing tea to drink. The mother, overcome with relief, embraced Saoirse tightly, thanking her for saving her son's life. From that moment on, any lingering doubts about Saoirse vanished. She had proven herself to be not only resourceful and knowledgeable, but also brave and compassionate. She had saved a child's life, and in doing so, she had cemented her place in the hearts of the people of Harmony Gulch. The rescue of Thomas marked a turning point in the town's perception of Saoirse. The initial wariness began to melt away, replaced by a growing respect and affection. They saw her not as a fragile outsider, but as a strong and capable woman who cared deeply about their community. People started seeking her out, not just for her skills, but for her company. The women gathered around her in the evenings, learning new knitting patterns and sharing stories. The men, who had once been skeptical of her abilities, now listened intently to her advice on everything from weather patterns to animal tracking. Even Silas, the gruff blacksmith, softened his demeanor towards her. He started bringing her small gifts, a piece of finely crafted ironwork, a handful of wildflowers he had managed to find pushing through the snow. He even offered to teach her how to shoe a horse, an offer she eagerly accepted. The children, who had initially been shy and reserved, now flocked to her side, eager to hear her stories of Ireland and to learn the games she had played as a child. She taught them how to make paper dolls, how to sing Irish songs, and how to tell fortunes with tea leaves. The saloon, which had once been a place of mostly male camaraderie, became a gathering place for the entire community. Saoirse organized evenings of music and dancing, bringing a much-needed spark of joy and laughter to the town. She encouraged people to share their talents, whether it was playing the fiddle, telling stories, or reciting poetry. Harmony Gulch was still a struggling town, facing a brutal winter, but there was a newfound sense of hope and unity. Saoirse had brought a sense of community that had been missing for a long time. She had shown them that even in the darkest of times, there was always room for kindness, compassion, and connection. They had sent for a mail-order bride, hoping for someone to help them survive, but they had received so much more. They had received a leader, a healer, and a friend. And they were finally beginning to understand just how lucky they were to have her. The coldness of the winter remained, but the coldness in their hearts was slowly thawing. Just when it seemed that Harmony Gulch might weather the worst of the winter, disaster struck. A massive ice storm swept through the mountains, coating everything in a thick layer of ice. The weight of the ice caused roofs to collapse, trees to snap, and power lines, newly installed the previous summer, to come crashing down. The storm also made it nearly impossible to hunt or gather firewood, further depleting their already dwindling supplies. But the most devastating consequence of the storm was the destruction of the town's food stores. The ice had seeped into the root cellars, freezing the remaining potatoes, turnips, and other vegetables. The smokehouse, which had miraculously survived the blizzards, collapsed under the weight of the ice, ruining the last of their smoked meat. Panic began to set in. The townspeople had faced hardship before, but this was different. This was a crisis that threatened their very survival. They huddled together in the saloon, their faces etched with despair. The mood was bleak, and many wondered if they would make it through the winter. In their desperation, they turned to Saoirse. She had proven herself to be a source of strength and wisdom, and they trusted her to guide them through this crisis. They looked to her with pleading eyes, hoping that she could offer some solution, some glimmer of hope in the face of overwhelming adversity. Silas, the blacksmith, spoke for everyone when he said, "Saoirse, you've helped us through so much already. We don't know what to do. Can you help us?" Saoirse, though frightened by the enormity of the challenge, knew that she couldn't let them down. She took a deep breath, gathered her thoughts, and began to assess the situation. She knew that time was of the essence, and that they needed to act quickly if they were to survive. The fate of Harmony Gulch rested on her shoulders. She had to find a way to save them, even if it seemed impossible. The town looked to her, their hope fragile but present. She knew she had to transform that hope into action. Saoirse spent the night huddled by the fire, racking her brain for a solution. She knew that they couldn't afford to panic. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. As dawn broke, she gathered the townspeople in the saloon. Her voice was calm and steady as she outlined her plan. First, she said, we need to assess what resources we have left. Every scrap of food, every piece of firewood, every tool. We need to know exactly what we're working with. She appointed 2 trusted individuals to take inventory, emphasizing the importance of honesty and accuracy. Second, she continued, we need to ration what food we have left. It won't be easy and it won't be pleasant, but it's essential if we want to make it through the winter. We'll divide the remaining food equally, ensuring that everyone gets a fair share, with extra rations for the children and those who are sick. Third, she said, we need to find a way to get more food. Hunting is difficult, but not impossible. We'll organize a hunting party, led by our most experienced hunters. They'll need to be careful and resourceful, but I believe they can find something to bring back. She suggested using snares and traps, which could be set and checked regularly, minimizing the risk to the hunters. Fourth, she added, we need to reinforce our shelters. The ice storm has weakened many of the cabins, and we need to make sure they can withstand further damage. We'll work together to repair roofs, reinforce walls, and insulate windows. Every little bit helps. Finally, Saoirse emphasized the importance of maintaining hope and morale. This is a difficult time, she said, but we can't give up. We need to support each other, to encourage each other, and to remember that spring will eventually come. We need to keep our spirits up, to sing songs, to tell stories, and to remind ourselves of the good things in our lives. Her plan was simple, but it was also practical and achievable. It was a plan that relied on the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and cooperation of the entire community. It was a plan that offered a glimmer of hope in the face of despair. And it was a plan that the townspeople were willing to embrace because they trusted Saoirse and they believed in her ability to lead them through this crisis. The next few weeks were a testament to the resilience and spirit of the people of Harmony Gulch. Inspired by Saoirse's leadership, they worked together with a determination they didn't know they possessed. The inventory was completed with painstaking accuracy. Every last bean, every strip of bacon, every log of firewood was accounted for. The results were grim, but at least they knew exactly what they had to work with. Rationing was difficult, especially for those with children, but everyone understood the necessity. Saoirse showed them how to stretch their supplies, using every part of the animals they managed to trap, and making soups and stews that were both nourishing and filling. She even taught them how to make a type of bread from ground acorns, a skill she had learned from Native Americans she had met on her journey west. The hunting party, led by Silas and Jebediah, braved the treacherous conditions, setting snares and traps in the woods surrounding the town. They returned empty-handed for the first few days, but they refused to give up. Finally, they managed to trap a few rabbits and a deer, providing a much-needed boost to their food supply. The entire town participated in the effort to reinforce the shelters. Men, women, and even children worked side by side, repairing roofs, reinforcing walls, and insulating windows with whatever materials they could find. They shared tools, offered encouragement, and helped each other through the difficult work. Saoirse, meanwhile, continued to tend to the sick and injured, using her knowledge of natural remedies to ease their pain and speed their recovery. She also organized evenings of storytelling and music, keeping their spirits up and reminding them that they were not alone. The ice storm had tested them to their limits, but it had also brought them closer together. They had learned to rely on each other, to support each other, and to appreciate the simple things in life. They had discovered a strength and resilience they never knew they possessed. And they had come to realize that Saoirse, the small Irish woman who had arrived during the worst winter in history, was not just a mail-order bride, but a true leader and a savior of their town. They faced the icy days together, hope rekindled in their hearts. Slowly but surely, Saoirse's plan began to work. The strict rationing, while difficult, ensured that everyone had enough to eat, even if it wasn't much. The hunting party, despite the treacherous conditions, continued to bring back small game, supplementing their dwindling supplies. The reinforced shelters provided protection from the elements, keeping them warm and safe. But most importantly, the townspeople's spirits remained high. Saoirse's evenings of storytelling and music provided a much-needed distraction from their hardships, reminding them of the joy and beauty that still existed in the world. They sang songs of Ireland, told tales of the Wild West, and shared stories of hope and resilience. Then, one morning, a miracle occurred. The sun rose in a clear blue sky, and the wind died down. The temperature, which had been below freezing for weeks, began to climb. The snow, which had been piled high for months, began to melt. The winter was breaking. A collective cheer went up from the town. The people of Harmony Gulch had survived the worst winter in history, and they had done it together. They had faced starvation, isolation, and despair, but they had never given up hope. And now, their perseverance had been rewarded. The melting snow revealed patches of green grass, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. The animals, which had migrated south for the winter, began to return. The mountain passes, which had been blocked for months, began to clear. Hope returned to Harmony Gulch, stronger than ever before. The townspeople knew that they still faced challenges, but they also knew that they could overcome anything as long as they worked together. They had learned a valuable lesson during the winter, that true strength lies not in individual power, but in community and cooperation. And they had learned that even the smallest person with the right skills and the right spirit can make a world of difference. Saoirse, The small Irish woman who had arrived during the worst blizzard in history had saved their town, and they would never forget it. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt bright. With the arrival of spring, Harmony Gulch began to blossom in more ways than one. The physical landscape was transformed by the melting snow and the returning greenery, but the emotional landscape of the town was also undergoing a profound change. Saoirse was no longer seen as an outsider, a mail-order bride who had arrived during the worst blizzard in history. She was now a beloved member of the community, a leader, a healer, and a friend. She had earned their trust, their respect, and their affection. She had found a home in Harmony Gulch, a place where she was valued and appreciated for who she was. She had found a purpose in helping others, in using her skills and knowledge to make a difference in the lives of those around her. She had finally found the freedom she had craved, not in escaping her past, but in embracing her future. The women of the town looked to her as a role model, admiring her strength, her intelligence, and her compassion. They sought her advice on everything from raising children to managing their households. They confided in her their hopes and their fears, knowing that she would listen with an open heart and offer wise counsel. The men of the town respected her for her courage, her resourcefulness, and her unwavering commitment to their community. They sought her opinions on matters of importance, knowing that she would offer a fresh perspective and a thoughtful solution. Even Silas, the gruff blacksmith, had become a devoted friend. He continued to bring her small gifts, and he often sought her company in the evenings, sharing stories and laughter. He had come to see her not just as a woman, but as an equal, a partner, and a kindred spirit. The children of the town adored her. They flocked to her side whenever she was near, eager to hear her stories and to learn from her wisdom. She taught them about the world beyond Harmony Gulch, inspiring them to dream big and to believe in themselves. Saoirse had transformed Harmony Gulch from a struggling, isolated town into a thriving, close-knit community. She had brought hope, joy, and a sense of belonging to a place that had been desperately in need of all three. She had saved their town, not just from the winter, but from despair. And in doing so, she had found her own salvation. She was home. Years passed, and Harmony Gulch continued to thrive under Saoirse's gentle guidance. The town expanded, new families arrived, and the community flourished. The memory of the terrible winter faded, replaced by a sense of gratitude and pride. One sunny afternoon, Saoirse stood on the porch of her cozy cabin, overlooking the town. The air was filled with the laughter of children playing, the sounds of hammers building new homes, and the sweet smell of wildflowers blooming in the meadows. She smiled, her heart filled with contentment. She had come to Harmony Gulch seeking freedom and a new life, and she had found so much more. She had found a home, a purpose, and a love that she never thought possible. Standing beside her was Silas, the blacksmith. He was no longer the gruff and taciturn man she had first met in the saloon. His face was softened by time and by love, and his eyes twinkled with warmth and affection. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gently intertwining with hers. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the town below. Silas had become her husband, her partner, and her best friend. He had shown her a love that was strong, steady, and true. He had accepted her for who she was, flaws and all, and he had supported her every step of the way. Together, they had built a life in Harmony Gulch, a life filled with joy, laughter, and purpose. They had raised a family, not just their own children, but the entire community. They had created a place where everyone felt welcome, valued, and loved. Saoirse looked at Silas, her eyes shining with happiness. She had come to America seeking a new beginning, and she had found it in the most unexpected place. She had arrived during the worst winter in history, but she had brought with her a spark of hope that had transformed an entire town. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over Harmony Gulch, Saoirse leaned against Silas, her heart overflowing with gratitude. She was home, she was loved, and she was finally free. The Irish mail-order bride, who had arrived as the worst winter in history began, had not only saved the town, but had found her own happily ever after in the process. The end.